Por lo tanto, no estaría completa, decía, esta bienvenida sin unas palabras de José Enrique Corchon, que es el viceconsejero de Finanzas y Presupuestos del Gobierno vasco. Corchon jauna, sailburuorde jauna, zurea da hitza, un placer.
Ministro jaunak, Nobel saridunak, jardunaldi hautara bertaratu zareten guztiok, ongi etorri Global Pensions programaren 11. ediziora. Lehenik eta behin, eskerrak eman nahi dizkiet ekitaldi honen antolatzaileei gu gomidatu izanagatik, eta lehen aldiz Euskadi egoitza gisa aukeratu izanagatik. Miami, Bogotan, Varsovia, Madrilen eta Washington DC-en izan ondoren, ilusio handiz, hartu dugu lekukoa eta erantzukizunez egin nahi diogu aurre nazioarteko topaketa garrantzitsu honi. Les decía en euskera que, en primer lugar, agradezco a los organizadores de este evento por su amable invitación y por haber elegido por primera vez a Euskadi como sede. Tras su paso por ciudades como Miami, Bogotá, Varsovia, Madrid, Washington, recibimos el testigo con gran ilusión, no exento de responsabilidad, por el reto que supone estar a la altura de este relevante encuentro internacional. En estas dos jornadas que hoy se inician, vamos a escuchar a diferentes actores de modelos de previsión social con una amplia experiencia académica, teórica y en muchos aspectos práctica. Conoceremos modelos inspiradores como el de Islandia, México, Brasil, Honduras, Chile, Colombia, República Dominicana. También me han dicho que participará en alguna mesa Paraguay. Yo soy vasco-paraguayo, por eso hago esta referencia. Y del mismo modo también podremos compartir con ustedes el modelo de previsión social que tenemos en Euskadi, que es reconocido y valorado en el Estado español. Se trata en definitiva de aprovechar este encuentro para aprender entre todos y todas, de otras experiencias en cuestiones como la transformación digital, el ciclo de la vida, la ciencia del comportamiento ante las pensiones, las cuestiones de género, inversiones ESG, todo un abanico de temas que en este momento preocupan y ocupan a la previsión social. El estado del bienestar en la sociedad actual ha supuesto el triunfo de los mecanismos institucionales de solidaridad sobre los sistemas de mercados que no logran satisfacer plenamente las necesidades económicas básicas de algunos grupos sociales vulnerables y de una masa social importante, una situación especialmente visible en coyunturas de bajo ciclo económico. La agrupación para la ayuda a las personas vulnerables supuso la primera toma de conciencia colectiva, el nacimiento de la idea de la asistencia mutua como imprescindible ante la presión de un mercado laboral donde el individuo aislado se enfrentaba a las leyes inexorables de oferta y demanda. Los orígenes solidarios y protectores de la persona trabajadora, germen de los sistemas de protección actuales, no pueden ser olvidados al reflexionar sobre la capacidad de nuestra previsión social. Todos los sistemas de pensiones y todas las partes de los sistemas de pensiones plantean riesgos financieros, demográficos y políticos. Y la cuestión siempre recae en quién asume estos riesgos. Un sistema de pensiones que esté constituido por diferentes tipos de partes, de reparto, de capitalización, colectivas, individuales, normalmente es más resiliente, ya que los riesgos están más diversificados y, por tanto, los resultados de la pensión son frecuentemente mejores para más personas. Y permítame que les hable un poco de nuestro modelo de previsión social, que es un referente en el Estado español. Lo primero, en Euskadi tenemos competencia exclusiva en los pilares segundo y tercero del sistema de pensiones. Esto es, las pensiones complementarias de empleo y en el ahorro privado previsional. Ya en 1981, el Gobierno vasco recibe la transferencia. Cuando recibió la transferencia de estas competencias en el Estatuto de Autonomía, el legislador no fue ajeno a la realidad existente en la sociedad vasca y se sintió especialmente comprometido con la herencia histórica de un pueblo que siempre ha hecho suyo el principio de avanzar sin dejar a nadie atrás. No obstante, se hacía necesario crear en Euskadi una figura innovadora que recogiera las distintas sensibilidades y aportara suficiente flexibilidad para atender a una situación cambiante y de amplio desarrollo. Así, en el año 83, a través de la ley, de la ley 25, nace al mundo del derecho las entidades de previsión social voluntaria, anticipándose legalmente a instituciones similares que se irán creando en otras comunidades del Estado. Dos son los objetivos prioritarios que se persiguen con esa ley: fomentar la libertad de actuación y desarrollo de estas entidades y velar en todo momento por los derechos de los asociados. Además, se persigue que estas EPSV tengan una buena gobernanza, siguiendo criterios de transparencia en la gestión y participación democrática de los socios en sus actividades de gobierno. En estos 43 años hemos conseguido un sistema complementario que protege a 1/3 de la población vasca y acumula recursos equivalentes a 1/3 de nuestro Producto Interior Bruto. Bajo este paraguas legislativo se establecieron y consolidaron sistemas complementarios a la seguridad social que engloban a la mayoría de los sectores laborales, el sector público vasco y de cientos y cientos de empresas del tejido productivo vasco. No podemos olvidar en este resumen el ahorro individual y voluntario, ese tercer pilar. Ya en el año 89, las diputaciones forales, que son las que tienen competencia en temas fiscales, aprobaron unas normas que consolidaron unos estímulos importantes y eso sirvió para que naciesen al albur de esas normas muchísimas EPSV de modalidad individual, a las que miles y miles de ciudadanos y ciudadanas se incorporaron, bien porque no tenían una institución similar en sus empresas o bien porque buscaban complementar a aquellas como un tercer pilar. Una primera impresión al oír estas cifras y estos datos, pues parece que podríamos hablar de que tenemos un sistema envidiable, pero si uno analiza la situación individual de ciudadano medio, se aprecia que no se ha generalizado lo suficiente esa previsión social complementaria entre las clases medias, bajas y bajas de nuestra sociedad, es decir, entre aquellos ciudadanos con escasa capacidad de ahorro. Una administración comprometida con sus ciudadanos y ciudadanas debe buscar fórmulas de acceso al bienestar social general. Y este Gobierno vasco hemos puesto en práctica la idea de establecer unas nuevas bases de desarrollo del sistema complementario de previsión social de Euskadi. Y en la jornada de mañana explicaremos su funcionamiento y desarrollo. Nuestro Departamento de Hacienda y Finanzas viene trabajando de la mano con la Federación de EPSV de Euskadi y junto a los agentes sociales para encontrar fórmulas necesarias que impulsen la generalización de la previsión social complementaria a través del segundo pilar, esto es, la modalidad de empleo mediante la negociación colectiva. Y nuestro objetivo es llegar a cubrir al 70% de la población trabajadora de Euskadi. Se trata de favorecer el ahorro finalista, no el ahorro en general. Por ello, a nuestro juicio, se debe atribuir una discriminación legal y fiscal positiva, tanto en aportaciones como en las prestaciones. Se trata de crear un instrumento eficaz que alcance al máximo número de personas. Los sistemas de previsión social complementaria deben tener un fin social, un conjunto de coberturas adecuado y deben ser financiados, sobre todo, en base a un ahorro derivado del trabajo, pero con un carácter de ahorro finalista. Esos fines y la forma óptima de conseguirlo van a llenar buena parte del contenido de estas jornadas, desde diferentes puntos de vista y análisis que sin duda enriquecerán el balance del Global Pensions Program, que hoy se inicia y en el que tenemos el honor de ejercer como anfitriones. Y no puede haber mejor forma de comenzar estas jornadas sobre pensiones que con una magistral exposición de un premio Nobel de Economía, como es el profesor Robert Merton, considerado el padre de las finanzas modernas. Merton recibió el Premio Nobel de Economía en el 1997 por desarrollar un nuevo método para determinar el valor de los derivados. Fue presidente de la American Finance Association, miembro de la Academia Nacional de Ciencias y miembro de la Academia Americana de Artes y Ciencias, así como varios títulos honorarios. Repasar la biografía de Merton es transitar por una dilatada vida académica que no ha cesado a sus 80 años. Tiene una licenciatura en Ciencias en Matemáticas de la Ingeniería de la Universidad de Columbia, másters en Ciencia del Instituto de Tecnología de California y un doctorado del Instituto Tecnológico de Massachusetts. Merton continuó con el MIT como profesor, donde enseñó durante casi 2 décadas y luego en la Universidad de Harvard otros 20 años y desde entonces ha regresado al MIT, donde es profesor emérito. Así que, sin duda alguna, les dejo con el mejor ponente posible para escuchar la conferencia inaugural de estas jornadas, el profesor Robert Merton. Eskerrik asko.
Thank you so much. Itxaron eta hemen agurtu, bai? Itxaron eta hemen agurtu. Thank you so much. Eskerrik asko. Muchísimas gracias.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you for your
Professor
kind
Merton,
remarks.
And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Oops. This is to make sure I don't speak for 2 hours. Okay. We have The title, there we are. Well, to all of you, I'm delighted to be here this morning to open this consequential conference on the global pensions. In this salutatory session to the multifarious discussions of the next 2 days, I will offer an innovation framework for a sustainable retirement system, adaptable to an array of circumstances that various countries face. Now, if I only get it to work. There. But before I get into the discussion of that design, we have to establish a couple of principles. We're talking about retirement here. Before we talk about the right way to do it, the best way to do it, the most efficient way to do it, let's talk what it is. So I will define for you, when I use the term, the goal of a good retirement. My definition, as you can see up here, says, if you can sustain the standard of living that you become accustomed to in the latter part of your work life, not during your work life, in the latter part, the way you are living before you retire, okay? If you can sustain that for the rest of your life, that's a good retirement. We all, of course, would like more, but that's what I will mean by that. And when I say that, the first thing I always want to mention is, in terms of goals, okay, this is not a wealth goal. I come to this lovely city. This is my first time here. I look around, I said, this is a beautiful place. What if I wanted to come and live here? And I said to someone, what would it take me to be able to live here like him? I doubt that you would tell me I need 2,176,500 euros. I think you would tell me you have to be earning a certain amount to live this way. We always define standard of living in terms of a flow of funds that are sufficient to support that standard, not a pot of money. And that's, of course, how we define and describe the benefits from our Social Security systems. But it's not the way we present things to people in either Pillar 2 or 3. So before I even get into the discussion, I want to underscore that one important thing is to communicate with those out there what they have, what they would like to have, and where they are. And that needs to be communicated in the appropriate dimensions. And it's not the amount of money you have in the account. It's how much income in retirement that you can support with what you have. So having said that, let me get into the events. The other thing I want to point out is when we talk about innovation and improving the retirement system anywhere, we have to be realistic, face realities. And one reality I want to point out is there are really only 4 ways to improve your chances of getting to a good retirement. You understand that's the goal. We may not get there, but there are only 4 ways. Save more, which of course means consume less, okay? Work longer. That way we don't have to fund as much afterwards and we can save more, okay? But that means carrying the bricks. Third way, which is always very attractive sounding, just take more risk. Because if you take more risk in an effective way, you should get a higher return and then you'll get more. Well, that may be what you expect, but I come to say on that piece, risk is real. This is not a hypothetical that says, oh yeah, it's risky, but not really. We're going to earn what we expect or maybe more. Risk is real. And therefore, if we choose that method as one of our ways, we have to have a clear idea of what plan B would be. Namely, if the risk is realized, how will we get by? How will we feel about it? Okay? So those 3 are all about, obviously, accumulating more assets, therefore more benefits, more resources. And I would then say there's one last one, which is whenever one gets to retirement, however you got there, whatever assets the person has, we want to get the most benefits from those assets. They need to be used very efficiently. And I'll talk to that by a specific example in a few minutes in my talk, so I won't dwell on it. But it's a very important component. But these are really the only four ways. You can't just dial up higher returns for the same risk. Look, the financial services industries around the world, including here, are spending all their time trying to get higher returns for the same risk. They can't just say to them, well, we need more return, but we don't want to take more risk. That is not a feasible answer. And that's why it's not on the list, except under number 3, where, yes, if you're willing to take more real risk, then you have an opportunity to make more. But that's got to be very clearly understood, not always made too clearly in representation to people. So let me move then, I'll get to the main event, in which I want to talk about what I call is the 6 feasible components to an integrated approach to the retirement system. In the opening remarks of the minister, he mentioned about the ability to have pillars 1, 2, and 3, a diversified set of alternatives, not just one, not just Social Security or the national pension, but an array. And I fully subscribe to that. And so the first thing I would say is pillar 1, the most important thing in my mind now is, especially with a pay-as-you-go system, as you have here for pillar 1, the most important is to make sure that the people trust that the benefits that are being promised in the future, not now, they're paying them now, but in the future are secure and will be paid. And in my own country, I can report to you, sadly, that many of the younger people, the people who are working and supporting Social Security, have their doubts about when they are retiring, whether they will get anything like the relative benefits that are now. And that's a great loss for 2 reasons. Number 1, because then they don't trust the system that's been put in place, so they don't factor it in. So there's no credit in their planning. They act like they're going to get nothing, which is probably not accurate, but nevertheless it affects behavior. And the other is that they're not going to get what they want. So I would say don't try to stretch your promises for pillar 1. To try to say, oh, we can do more, we can do more, we can do more, but of course we can't finance it. Much more important is to make sure that there's a belief, not just among retirees, but among the younger people, the people who are the working sector, who are supporting this generation with the belief that the next generation will support them. And that's really an important component there. That's all I want to say on that. You mentioned in the opening your remarks pillar 2, and that is the typically employer, but also government employee DC plan, defined contribution plans, which have the important feature, unlike pillar 1, in which the amount put in is defined, but the outcomes for benefits depend on the investment experience in the fund, and that risk is being taken by the retiree. Not only does this impose a risk, I believe it's probably a necessary risk, okay, but it also imposes decisions, because if I have to take the risk, I also have to take the responsibility for what is invested in. These are decisions that people, even very well-educated people, don't know how to do, have not had to do in the past, and probably won't be able to do particularly well in the future. And so we need to address that issue, and it is addressable. Everything I mentioned to you here are being done somewhere. Some are not yet being done at all, but they can be. And I will say for you, when you're thinking of innovation, particularly in something as big as a retirement system, and as long as it takes to put it together, don't just look at best practice for guidance of what to do with your new system. Best practice is a legacy because it exists. That's like driving your car looking in the rearview mirror. What you want to ask is the question, what can be done? It may not have been done, but we know that things can be done that haven't because of the speed of innovation. And that's how planning should be done, not looking at what has been done only. Of course, you look at what has been done, but that's not adequate. Now, the first thing is, if they're going to give this plan, it's going to work in a sustainable way, a way that is practical, then you really need to make Pillar 2 as simple for people as Pillar 1. And that means only have their decisions based on things they already know how to do. Because if they already know how to do it, they have nothing they have to learn, and they can understand and make decisions based on what they already know. So that's the critical element, and I will tell you that while that's hard to do, and frankly it's not particularly well done now anywhere really in terms of the world, better than it was, so there have been improvements, but it is doable, very doable, okay? And so I encourage you to always think in terms of that for Pillar 2. Because that, by the way, I'm sure you're aware, in the United States, in the employer plans, Pillar 2 has completely dominated the old defined benefit pensions of the corporations. And that's happening in China now. It's happening everywhere in the world. So even if the system here is working okay without it or only with limited amounts, be aware that that's probably where things have to go. Because the risks need to be borne. Everyone would like to have risk-free, but that's a pretty costly proposition. So we need to make it so that it's as easy to use as that. The second thing I would mention, which I alluded to in my opening remarks about what the goal is, that because, in Pillar 2, if you look at your account, what do you see when you click on it, if it's on the thing? They show you how much money you have in the account. Green if it's up, red if it's down. But as I've already said, that's not the number that's relevant. What's the number that's relevant for them to see is how much income in retirement could I actually buy? Not what I wish I could buy, not when someone has promised me that when my money doubles I can buy, but what I could buy now of income in retirement. Look at that number and provide it. That's the most relevant number. That's the number that will help them to really understand where they are at any point in time, and therefore influence their decisions whether they need to save more or do something else, or whether they're on a good path. All right? This has already been mandated in the United States in 2019, and in Mexico also in 2019. It's two examples. Mexico implemented, the United States is still writing the rules. So it's slow. But it's the easiest thing you can put into Pillar 2 to make things better for people, because it doesn't really cost you anything. Your people, your experts know how to convert the amount that's in the account into an amount of income in retirement. It's like computing for an annuity. It's using market interest rates and so forth, which most people don't know how to do, nor should they have to. So my point being, easiest thing you can do to improve Pillar 2 is to, along with showing them what the account is worth, but really show them how much income they have, because if you do it in the right way, it will allow them to understand where they are. And so that's my first recommendation for any system. The second one is that, and very important, is that you need to have an automatic default. What I mean by that is if people put their money into Pillar 2 and they don't make a decision, you got to do something with the money if it's an employer plan or whatever. And so you have a default. And the default should be extremely well developed and designed. You should put most of your effort into that. Not because most people won't make a decision, it's because many people want to make a decision, but they don't know what decision to make. And if it's an employer plan, I can tell you, generally, I can't speak here in the Basque Country or in Spain because this is my first time here. But I can tell you in general that employees trust their employers more than they do banks or insurance companies or asset managers, even though they sometimes are annoyed with their employers. They trust them. And so if the employer has a very good, or the sponsor of the plan in general, has a very good default, they'll say, this is what my employer is recommending for us. It must be good. So all those people who want to choose are likely to choose it. And the experience, I can say firsthand in the United States, is that there's a very high incidence of choosing the default for people who are in these type plans. And that indicates that that's in support of what I'm suggesting to you. So spend a lot of effort, and it can be done. I will keep underscoring this. It really is doable. You can design something that they don't have to give you information. They're not engaged. They're thinking about building their careers, building their families. They're not thinking about retirement. So don't expect them to fill out forms and watch the tapes and learn all about investing. That isn't reality. Okay, so that's the second. Finally, at some point before retirement, typically, somewhere, maybe 10 years before, I don't know, but they start to become realistic about the fact that they actually have retirement. And they become engaged because it's now a matter of an issue to them. Okay? The third thing to have is that Pillar 2 should offer a very easy-to-use dial that only based on meaningful information and meaningful choices. Don't give them a bunch of stuff about risk-return frontiers and rates of return and all that sort of thing. That's like saying to drive your car, you have to understand how the internal combustion engine works. You don't need that to drive a car, and you don't need that to make intelligent decisions and financial decisions. So those are the elements there. And finally, when they make the transition from Pillar 2, I'm focusing on that because that's where they're responsible, from Pillar 2 accumulation to drawdown, that's a time of stress because they're approaching a deadline and they have to make important decisions, often decisions that are one way. Once you've made it, you can't reverse it, such as an annuity. Okay? And so make that transition as simple as possible. By the way, if you have put in income into what you show them all the time they've been accumulating, talking to them about income and retirement is going to be a much more simple process than talking to them about wealth, goal, your number in wealth. Oops, now it's income. Okay, so that's Pillar 2. The third one, I call it Pillar 3, and I think from what I heard this morning, it corresponds. First, every country, my own included, but many countries have a very large informal sector. A good part of the population is often not part of any pension, not even Social Security. In some countries, it's 40 or 50% of the population. If you're building a retirement system for your country, it should be for all the people in the country, not just some of the people. And therefore, Pillar 3 design, the innovation, has to do with how can you design an instrument, a financial instrument. We're not talking about giving people money. We're talking about giving an instrument by which people can save on a personal basis without an advisor and with a very limited formal education. I'll talk more about that, so let me move on from that. Okay? So that's what Pillar 3 does. It fills in a practical way the personal component that you add. And of course, beyond those in the informal sector, even those who were part of Social Security, as was mentioned again in the minister's opening remarks, that typically the Social Security, it doesn't necessarily provide all the resources that one would like for retirement. And therefore, you're left to be personal saving. And so for those people, the same instrument would work very well. So those are 3 of the first 6. Now let me quickly go to the others. The fourth is repeat of what I already said was necessary, the only ways you can improve your chances, which is to maximize the amount of benefits for the same risk So not expected benefits necessarily, but to maximize the number of benefits you can get from whatever assets that you do have, the most efficient ways. As a practical matter for pension systems, that means not for the very poor, who have to be taken care of in different ways, or for the well-off, because they're well-off, but for the vast bulk of people that represented in the retirement and pension system who are working, they're okay, they're fine, but they're not wealthy, and this is important to them. They have to worry about it. And in that case, what we want to do, the most important tools, I think, that will move the needle, and again, I will show you that in an example, are the annuity. And for simple statement, if you don't remember or know what an annuity is, the way I think of an annuity, it says, if I buy an annuity, I'm going to get paid every month, I'm going to get a payment for the rest of my life, even if I live to be 120, as all the good books wishes. In return, however, when I no longer need money, I've gone someplace better, I hope, okay, I give up that money. Now, that's always seemed to me like a very good transaction. Money for as long as I need it, and give up the money I have when I don't need it. And so that's one. The second one has to do with the way people save, almost everywhere in the world, but certainly I believe here, is people acquire a house. It may be modest, it may be grand, but it's their house, and it reflects how they live. That's most of where personal saving comes from for most people. Okay? That's their practice for saving. They eventually pay for the whole house. They get a bigger one maybe if they're lucky, fortunate. And then that, when they acquire, is their major personal saving. They don't typically hold stocks and bonds and things like that. That's what they hold. So that's the normal saving behavior. The house, therefore, if people have one in retirement, is a wonderful asset because it serves two purposes. First, it is a form of a specialized annuity. It's an annuity that pays for your housing, which in some countries is a third of your consumption, so it's a very important part. And it's the house you want to live in. It's not a house that just arbitrarily, randomly picked, okay? So in that sense, it is an annuity that you need in retirement. But you're not going to forever need the house. Someday, like with the annuity, you won't need a house. But the house will still have value, perhaps some considerable value. So if we can figure out a way to take the value that's going to be left after you no longer need the house and bring it back in time to today when you're retired to improve your retirement benefits when you do need money and a house, that's going to be very efficient. Now, the vehicle for doing that has a very unfortunate name, reverse mortgage. And I know that it exists in principle here in this country and so forth, but like in many countries, it's not at the moment used as much as one would expect. And I can explain a little bit of that in a while, but let me just simply say the following. It's well done, and I underscore well done, because you can have a wonderful idea. If it's poorly done, it's a poor thing to have. Nobody wants it. A car that only starts 1 out of 4 times is not something you want, even though you may like a car. But if you can have a good reverse mortgage, that can play a very big role in improving retirement without having people to have to change their saving behavior and without it interfering with their retirement life. It's just an efficiency gain. Okay? So that's number 4, and I'll talk a little more. 5th, you remember I mentioned in the 4 ways, save more, which means consume less, work longer if you can, okay? Well, let's stop on that one. Many people retire not because they choose to retire, but they effectively retire because they've been told their job, they no longer can do their job and they're no longer wanted. I'm sorry to say that. So they say, I'm retiring, but that's because they don't have a choice, all right? And some people can't work in retirement. That's life. We all have that. But many people can work in retirement. And so my fifth one is, let's make that a realistic thing to actually have. Something that people planning for their retirement know would be there. And what I mean by that is, if I say, well, in principle, I say you can work longer, they may say to me, I don't have a job, or how do I get that job, or how do I keep that job, or I can't do the job that I have been doing, but I could do another job, all right? So my recommendation is to consider very seriously creating a job bank, not make work, just a device to give people money, where they're actually doing productive work for society. They're working for a living, just like the rest of us. Okay? And make those jobs, design them to the comparative advantage of seniors. You don't hire someone my age to carry bricks and mortar across the buildings. But if you take someone my age, they have a lot of experience. They've calmed down in certain ways. Okay? They've raised children, many. Okay? So there are things that older people do better than younger people. They're not trying to build a career. They don't have all those things that they're objected to. They just want to do this. So design jobs, both public sector and private sector. Put together jobs that use the comparative advantage of seniors. So you're not doing something as kind of a helper or a walk. You're doing this for greater productivity, at the same time providing people who can and want to work longer the opportunity to do so. And as I said on my first comment about the Social Security system, knowing that that's available, not as a hypothetical, but that there's a jobs bank and there's a series of places so that a person who's capable can kind of rely that they can get that kind of job, okay, whether it's planting beautiful plants in the public gardens to keep them all nice for half a day each day. You understand what I'm saying, I think. All right? If you provide that, that's a real way to win-win. Provide, first of all, cash flow to the people, so if they haven't made their goal, they could still try to get there or get by. Two, it provides very important psychological things. We all know that if you're working, and then you just quit and you go home, that can have negative impacts on all kinds of people because it's such a shock after decades of working. This allows you the flexibility to have a tapering off of work, okay? Productive work. Feel like you're really contributing, not just sitting around, okay? And finally, you'll increase your GDP and productivity because you'll be using your labor, people who are doing labor, more efficiently. So while this isn't being done, we're in the day of technology. Creating job banks is not not rocket science anymore, okay? And designing jobs like this would seem to me to be a very feasible way of approaching things. And you build this in and it becomes part of the system. That's one. So now my last one is restructure the retirement plan if you don't already. I believe the contributions here also pay for medical. I think that's the case. But I'm thinking more of it as a life cycle perspective rather than just retirement. So most retirement systems, the only thing you can use your retirement money for, pillar 1, 2, or 3, is for retirement. And I'm saying, the life cycle hypothesis, which seems to describe reasonably well people's behavior, is that people would prefer to have a uniform or smooth consumption through their lifetime. They don't want to, live on beans and, here and so forth while they're working so they can dine on crystal when they retire, or the reverse. They want a balance. Now, if you believe that is at least a characterization of most people, then if in their work life they have a shock by which their sort of permanent income that they live on is decreased for whatever sets of reasons, technology, whatever, but it comes down, okay, then you want to recognize that it doesn't make sense to keep the same goal for retirement you had before when you were earning up here to keep it smooth. What you should do, instead of letting it all come out of now where you come way down, this was most dramatic during COVID, although not permanent, but still, okay? What you do is you allow them to draw some of this down to balance it out so they don't have to take such a big shock. And it's not taking away from retirement, it's recognizing that the retirement goal has changed. So doing this, by the way, will also encourage people to be willing to put their money, more money into retirement, whether it's pillars 1, 2, or 3, because they recognize if that event happens, they can access it if needed. Whereas if you don't allow them to, they say, I have to keep this money out for precautionary reasons. So these are my 6 combined choices that I offer. And, you don't have, they should be integrated. You don't have to do them all at once. And I'm not trying to tell you this is one grand design that every country do. That would be, first of all, that's just totally impractical. It's a framework which you then adapt to the circumstances of the individual culture and society. But all of these things will work in any society, in my belief. And it's the direction that we're going. So that said, now let me just finish my remarks. I have another, I believe, 15 minutes. Is that correct? I'm looking for somebody in authority. Well, I'm going to take it anyway, okay, rather than worry about it. I want to go into 2 of my 6 to show you a little more detail so you understand this isn't just something I scratched on the back of a paper before coming here. So I'm going to look at first number 4. Remember that was the more efficient use of the assets you had. And I mentioned already that for most people, it will be a well-functioning annuity and a well-functioning reverse mortgage. I hate that name. The South Koreans call it a home pension. I think that's a much better description. But whatever you call it, what I wanted to point out to you is that first with the annuity, I already mentioned that the big benefit of the annuity is that you get paid, you never run out of your assets like a pension, so you don't have that fear, and it is a very big fear once you've crossed over from not being able to work again, okay? At the same time, you get more while you're doing it. Why? Because you give up that money when you don't need it. So that's this, and then there's stuff where you can buy what's called tail insurance. You know, they sell special contracts that don't pay you anything until you're over 85. Which, as we understand, is not too likely, but as we know, lots of people are living longer, and so you can kind of do that. But let me not get off on that. Now let me turn over here to the house. By the way, I think I looked it up, and I think in Spain the housing numbers are somewhere around 72 to 75%. I believe here in the Basque Country it's probably over 90%. That have their own home. You could tell me if I'm wrong, but that's what I understand. If that's the case, then you see this is applicable to a good part of the population, not just a small segment. So looking here at the house, what is the advantage of a reverse mortgage over just borrowing money, a loan, equity loan or something? The advantage is the reverse mortgage, you get money, from whoever provides the mortgage, but you pay nothing as long as you live in the house. So there's no monthly payment that you might miss if things go bad because you make no payments. All the interest continues to accrue, and when you are no longer living in the house, then the mortgage comes due. Now, in every country it's a little different, but basically those are the basic principles. All right? So what's very good about that is the retiree doesn't have to worry about, I may not have enough money to make the payments on the mortgage, or if the bank calls the mortgage, says we don't do this anymore, pay it off or get another one. So that's what I think makes it a very attractive for this purpose. There are no repayments with it. They're also, by the way, for simplicity, if nothing else, they're non-recourse. What that simply means is that when the loan comes due, interest plus principal, the only recourse the lender has is to the house. They can't go after any other assets, so they don't bother the estate. They don't have all this, grimble. So that's the structure. It works very well if it's well designed. Unfortunately, in many places, the fees are high. Not the rates on the mortgage for the risk it's taking, but the fees and stuff can be high. But that's fixable. So I say this could really move it. Let me quickly show you an example from the United States. And I just want you, I won't even go through the assumptions. This is a hypothetical 50th percentile income in the United States, $50,000 a year. The goal is when they retire, they need 72% replacement, less than the full 50 because they're no longer saving for retirement, and many often are not looking after children anymore, so they don't need as much as they had in income, but whatever that number is. So the goal here was 36,000. They had 165,000 in their Pillar 2, and they had a $300,000 house. I won't go into other details. If they do the standard thing, which is get Social Security, Pillar 1, plus put their money in a bonds to earn interest to live on, then they would have 21,000, they would have roughly 60% of their goal achieved. So that would be just standard approach. If instead they annuitized, namely instead of the bonds, they actually buy a life annuity, because of the giving up when they don't need it, they get a much bigger payout, and now they get 77% of their goal by doing the annuity. And again, these numbers will change based on market conditions. That's not the point. I want you to see these are big numbers in terms of the impact of using these tools. That's the story here. Finally, if they take a reverse mortgage, in the United States, the maximum that you could take is 54% of the value of the house. So that's what I've done here. Imagine you take that and put it in an annuity, so you're covered for the rest of your life no matter what happens. And remember, you pay nothing as long as you live in the house. So, if you're going to live in the house for the rest of your life, then that's pretty simple. And what do we get to? We get to 100%. Breakdown, Social Security, Pillar 1, 52%. Annuity, 24%. Reverse mortgage, 24%. Only message I want you to see here is if you design a well-developed reverse mortgage that people can understand and has proper conditions and doesn't have lots of frictions and lots of cost, okay? You can really improve things for people without changing saving behavior at all. And we all know it's very difficult to change people's saving behavior. It's worse than getting people to give up smoking, and that, what that took, okay? So that's where I wanted to take it. Now, finally, I have still enough minutes left. I'm going to go to number 3, Pillar 3 as I called it. And I said I wanted to have an instrument, a security, that people could make personal investments with without an advisor, without knowing anything really about finance. Okay? That's the goal. And so we're going to create a bond, and it is a bond, that addresses that, and in particular addresses the informal sector, whereas in principle, they may have to fund 100% of their retirement from personal saving. And they're not easily blended into the system because they're not in the records. I would also note, but we won't have time, that the design of this bond will also help other policies of the government and therefore help you sell the idea not just to retirement-interested people in the government, but to debt management and to others, that this bond can help many countries to facilitate infrastructure finance more efficiency and can improve the credit rating and the stability of their government debt market. So I want you to also just hear that it's multifaceted with respect to policy, although the objective here is to deal with retirement. Now, we call it a retirement security bond, RSB, and I'm going to tell you what it is. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is it's a government bond. If it were in the United States, it's for full faith and credit U.S. Treasury. It has the highest rating of the government. It's not an agency bond. It has the highest rating. Therefore, it's more secure in its payments than even Social Security or pensions. It's the highest rating a country has. No country, nobody gets a higher rating than their country in for good reasons. Okay? So this is the best we could do there. So if you ask the question, well, what happens if we own this bond and I pass away? The answer is, what happens if you own a government bond in your country and you pass away? Same answer. So all those kinds of questions you might have, you already have the answers to. So let's move on. I want to tell you what's different about it. Okay? What's different about it is the pattern of payments. They look completely different than a regular government bond. In fact, if I show this to a bond trader of government bonds, they say, I wouldn't buy that. That's a crazy bond. And then I'd say to them with all respect, I'm not trying to sell it to you. I'm selling it to people who want to save for retirement. So, and by the way, don't worry. If people want this for retirement, we're successful in getting people to adopt it, the bond traders will trade it all you want. They'll trade anything as long as there's volume to trade. So it'll trade in the government bond market just like other government bonds. So you don't have to do that. Now, the first thing is the payments are different. Why? We're trying to make it like a pension. Now, what is a pension? When you put your money in a pension, all right, or your employer does for you, they could have given it to you as salary, so you're putting your money in the pension either way. That's money out, right? What do you get next? Nothing until when? You reach retirement. And then what do you get? A stream of steady payments. That's what a pension is. We're creating a bond, not a pension, not a Social Security system, a bond. You buy the bond. It pays nothing for a certain number of years, just like putting money in a pension. And then at a particularly named year, 2040, for example, it starts making level payments. So do you see the payments on the bond mirror the payments you would get from putting your money in a pension? And that's why we call it a pension bond. So it looks very sensible when compared to a pension. It looks very strange compared to normal bonds you buy in the market. Okay? But that's why we changed it to that. The second thing that's different about it, it's not in euros or in the United States in dollars. It's indexed. Now you have index bonds here for inflation. So you have examples of where you index to something other than the euro. You have bonds that pay an interest rate plus inflation, as does the rest of Euroland, or most of it. Okay? Here, we're not indexing it to inflation, we're indexing it to per capita consumption. Why? Go back to what we said was the goal. The goal was standard of living when you retire. If you buy an index bond today at 41, age 41, what do you get? You get protected against inflation. You lock in today's standard of living when you were 41. When you're 65 or whenever you retire, that standard of living may not look so good. Think now back 20 years from ago and how you were living and what kinds of equipment you have, and ask if you'd be satisfied today with that same standard of living. Do you see what I'm saying? The beauty of a per capita consumption, it protects against both inflation and standard of living. What does this do? It takes away those two risks, but as importantly, it eliminates the need for the person who's making the decision to buy it, the actual user, to forecast inflation in the future for the next 20, 30 years, or to forecast what standard of living is going to be. Heaven knows what that will be. Because whatever it is, you're covered for it. The same reason that if you buy index bonds to inflation, you don't have to forecast inflation because you're protected against it. Okay, so that's the only two changes. The third thing I would point out is how is it sold? It's issued by the government. Big versions of it, meaning normal size for government bonds, will be sold in the same way at auction and then traded in a secondary market. But they will also be directly purchasable from Treasury in much smaller units, but marked to the prices of the auction and secondary market. So there's no subsidies or anything like that. That the pricing of the little ones and the big ones are basically going to be market prices, okay? So I can buy little ones, in little pieces at a little time. And the idea is that if you were going to retire in 2040, that's as long as you're planning to, it's like going into a shoe store. What do you do? Or going online now. If you go to a shoe store, what's the first thing you do? You look at the size, right? If you have a 12-size shoe, you don't go to the 6s, and vice versa. The parallel here is when you go to buy an RSB, you look down all the different bonds. Their dates are not their maturity dates. Their dates are the dates they start paying. They start paying in 2040, they start paying in 2050, etc. The date they start. If you're planning to retire in 2040, you always get a size, the same bond, the 2040. And the government always issues the 2040 as long until they start paying on the 2040. Now, the purpose of that is no matter when you buy your 2040 bond, it's the same bond identically. So it doesn't matter when you bought it. You don't end up with a portfolio of 20-year bonds, 15-year bonds, 17-year bonds, all kinds of different things. That's complexity of the wrong kind. What you always have is just one bond, and they're all the same, okay? And so it's very easy to understand what you have and what you're not. So that's how it's done. Those are the three things. Now, quickly, I still have 5 minutes. I'm looking at here, okay? Ask me, when I presented this, I've been doing this kind of thing, not just this, for more than a half century. And every time you come up with an innovation, everybody's telling you why you can't do it. It can't be done. So that's abnormal. So when I mention this to people, they say, well, Professor, that's a very clever idea. But really, in the real world, I'll talk about my own country, we have 30-year TIPS, that's inflation-protected bonds. Long-term 30-year bonds is good enough. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. So why get into this? Well, don't just take it when you're told good enough. Check it out. I want you to check it out. Imagine, let alone somebody with an 8th grade education, imagine somebody with a good education who wants to buy the bond and what they have to do. If they buy the RSB, they make a payment here. I'm picking here a very young person, 31 years old, retiring in 2058. That's 34 years from now, a long time, okay? They buy the bond today. They get nothing, but they have to do nothing, just like your pension. They have no action to take from this bond until when? 2058, and then it pays level payments, of course, adjusted for inflation and so forth, but forget that for the moment. So if they retire in 2058 as they planned, how many transactions did they make? One. They bought it. They bought it, they didn't have anything to do, and when they got to retirement, if they retire then, they're getting exactly the payments they want. They don't have to do anything. Now remember, it's a bond, so if for any reason they need money or they change their mind or they get sick or any other thing, they could still sell it. It's not like it's locked up in some pension or annuity. It's a bond. It's just something that they can sell to the government at any time, okay? So one transaction. Now let's do the 30-year. You all are probably aware that a typical bond is issued, it pays coupon payments every half year, two coupons a year, every 6 months. So on a 30-year bond, you're going to have 60 coupon payments. And then at the end of 30 years, they give you your principal back, a big chunk of it. That's what you can see here. The money goes out, you get payment, and then boom. And by the way, it's 4 years before you retire. What does that mean? Just imagine doing your own inspection. Imagine what it's like, especially when you're younger, you have very few bonds, so you're getting a very small coupon payment. Forget about transaction costs or fees. You get this little payment. You have to take your time, even if it's online, to reinvest that coupon. You got to figure it out. You got to do it. It's a transaction that takes your time, effort. What are a lot of people really realistically going to do when it's a small payment? I'll just keep it. You've just destroyed the process. because they're not compounding, they're not putting the money back in. Okay? 61 transactions to here. Then when they get here, when they get this big lump of money, they have no idea, we have no idea, no one in this room with all respect knows what the interest rates or market prices are going to be for bonds 30 years from now. Yes, rates may be very high, good if they're real rates, but they can be very low. We've certainly lived through a period of that. I don't have to describe that as an event. We've had that for many years until recently. So they have huge reinvestment risk. They have a large number of transactions, which means they won't do it. So don't let them say good enough when it's not. And that's why we designed it this way. This works, and this does it. And by the way, for you who have pensions, have Social Security, but may want to use Pillar 2, or may want to just personally save, this is an attractive bond for you too. It isn't just for people who are in the informal sector. All right. I just wanted to finally just say on this, because I've looked at the time, and I know as I've run over it, I want to say the following. Think how simple this is for a person to use. First question they have to ask was, how many bonds do I need? What's my goal? Remember we showed a goal? You got to have a goal. Your travel agent can't do anything for you until you tell them where you want to travel to. You have to have a goal. What's the goal? Because you're covered for both standard living and inflation, you tell people, how are you living now? If you're living on $50,000 now, your goal is $50,000. Remember, you're going to get covered for the other. So you don't have to go forecasting anything. You just say, most people know how they're living now. Okay, they know what they're living on now. So they have the answer to that. Okay, and then how many do I buy as a goal? It's going to be, if it's $50,000, then if each bond pays $10 a year, the number of bonds you need is 10 into 50, 5,000 bonds. See how easy it is to get your goal? Didn't need anything because you're just thinking about what you already know. Okay? Now, 15 years from now, you ask yourself, or maybe next month, but 15 years from now, you ask, how am I doing on my way to my goal? Say the goal hasn't changed, or it's just incremented up in terms of standard living. Okay? You look at bonds, you say, I have 3,000 bonds. Each bond pays $10. So what do I know I have instantly? 30,000 in retirement. I'm 60% the way to my goal. Notice I didn't have any advisor calculate that for me. All I had to do is multiply 10 times 3,000, and I think you can get that done with a calculator or a friend. All right? And so now you can ask the question. That's wanted to make the point. Somebody might say, oh, well, I'm 60% of the way there, but I'm going to have to save a lot more to get to where I want to be because I can't imagine myself living in today's world at 30,000 when I'm used to living at 50. But someone else may say, my kids will be grown up, I'm not going to be financially responsible for them, and I love bird watching. I love it. That's what I want to do with my life. That's what is my passion. And I already have the binoculars. And I can walk around. It's actually very inexpensive to do bird watching. So maybe I don't really need 50,000 to go. Maybe now the kids are everything, maybe I need less. What I want you to see how an individual, each one of you, can think about immediately your circumstances, your tastes, your interests, and think about it in an intelligent way without any calculations, compound interest, understanding how to convert dollars or accumulations into permanent income, any of that stuff. You don't need any finance. It's basically a price for the bond, and you know what you're getting. You have a price for tomatoes, you know what you're getting. You have a price for a car, you know what you're getting. You have a price for RSB, you know what you're getting. And sometimes the price is higher, maybe it's lower. Well, that happens with tomatoes and cars too. So people are used to that. They don't like it when it goes up, but they're used to it. So I'll quit on that because I just don't have the time to go any further. I would love to. But I would just say to you first that the users of this, although it had in mind the informal sector. As I've already mentioned, you could use this to fill out what you need for your own personal saving goals, if you need it. If you have a Pillar 2, these could be put in the Pillar 2 account for you, and they could be bought just like bonds. Now, this doesn't replace risk-taking. This doesn't take away from financial services where you get stocks and stuff like that to take risk. Number 3 on the list of how to improve things. That remains the same. This is the risk-free asset. But it's a very efficient one, I believe. Okay? So this is not a replacement for Social Security, Pillar 1. It's not a replacement for the financial services industry at all. Advisors are going to love it because even for wealthy people who want to structure a very complicated wealth management with an advisor, they have people that they want to take care of, like a second cousin you're responsible for. You can buy an RSB for them and get them a nice, convenient coverage of how much they want. And so you can see it's for everyone. So that's my message here. Last point is, those are all the individuals, the advisors, but who else? Pension funds. They've promised Pillar 1 payments. That's their liability. This is a perfect hedge for them. So for the risk-free part of their portfolio, they can tailor it to their exact composition of their pension rather than just buy a generic bond. That means that they can be more precise in their hedge of the risk-free part, which means they don't have as much of a cushion. They can put more at risk and earn higher expected returns. Same thing for insurance companies who write annuities. My belief is that everybody will buy this if it's put out and it works well, okay? And so that's my message. The last one, just so you don't think I have a bias that government should do everything. The reason for government being a government bond, okay, is one, if it were put out by a private bank or something, what would your SEC, your Securities Commission, require you to say to people? Yes, they're promising to pay you all this in the future, but they may not. And you have big, long risk statements, right? You see, that's not going to work very well. That will shut people right down. But if it's the full faith and credit of government, you can give no better standard. Most countries do not require risk statements for full faith and credit of their own country, okay? I don't know, I assume that's true here in Spain. So that's one reason. The second reason, if this is going to be a part of your retirement system, not a replacement, an adjunct, an extension, an improvement, then it has to be available every day, good times and bad, because people retire every day. So you have to have a reliable supplier. Well, I think every country in the world, at least most all of them, are always needing to borrow money. So they have a need to issue bonds, okay? And they're a government. Their job or their responsibility is to look after their people. If this is something that will help their people, they ought to do it. Not as a subsidy. These are market prices, but the availability. So that's the second reason. The third one is you already have a government bond market. You have auctions. You know how to do it. You don't have to create a new agency. You don't have to create a whole new set of markets and rules and regulations that take years. It's just a government bond. So you issue it the same way. You don't have all that extra thing. Now, I just will mention two others as I get off the stage. One is, do you have infrastructure projects that you have here in the country? Yeah. What's the nature of an infrastructure project? All payments out for years, build an airport, build a road system, right? And then you get the benefits. How do you finance it? With bonds. Many countries cannot issue more than 5 or 10-year bonds, let alone 20 years. Okay? So they have to do two things. First of all, they have to borrow more money than they need for the project because they got to pay all the coupon payments because this thing is producing no money to pay it. So you have to borrow the money from people to give it back to them. Secondly, you've got this airport being built. 5 years out, you have to refinance. It's half built, and the markets won't let you refinance at any reasonable price. Now you're left with half an airport. We've all seen that happen in some countries. It's a very bad mismatch between the financing and the project. These are perfect for the projects. You pay nothing out on them. It's spread out all over. Some people will be retiring 5 years, some in 10, but it's spread out all over, okay? And it's more matched to infrastructure, so it actually reduces the risk, the financing risk for the country, for infrastructure. It's strengthening it. VAT, you have a VAT, I believe. What is that? That's a consumption tax, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. It picks up everything to the final user. What is the payments on this? Aggregate consumption. So if things go very well in the country and consumption goes way up, you're going to have to pay more, right? But you're going to take in more tax revenue. And if things don't go well, your tax revenues are down, but you don't have to pay as much. Do you see, from the point of view of the debt management, both sides of the balance sheet, you're better hedged with a consumption bond than you are with a euro bond. Anyway, so last things, these are the things to say. I hope you get the spirit of this. I should just mention, this was all done in theory. It was presented out there, but as you can see, designing these things takes a lot of detail, because this is not something you do on a napkin in a restaurant, because all the details, the difference between whether it'll work or not. And you have to have every detail work, including how to do it politically. But, so that's what I wanted to show you. By the way, a country has adopted a version of it. Brazil, a year and 9 months ago, issued Rende Maize. That's their name for RSB. Now, like when you do software or new innovations, you have version 1.0. It's a simplified version. Then you get 2.0, 3.0, and so forth. This is a 1.0. It has not all the features I've shown you. I've showed you the whole show, where you want to be, where you want to end up. But you don't get there in one step, typically. On their own, this had nothing to do with me or my co-author who developed this. It's the theoretical, the science work. This has nothing to do with it. The Treasury of Brazil found out about this, and they became enamored with it. They said, we want to have it. And they went and did it. And it got done because it had local champions. It was not some coming out, some hired gun coming out from another country telling you how to run your business. It was an internal thing. So I know I've run over. I'm really bad, but you can understand a little enthusiasm. Now, how well it's working, I don't know. I mean, I could tell you there's numbers out there you can check. They're very enthusiastic about it. But it's a very simplified version, but it's working. It's being done. And when you're doing a new innovation like this, the fact that it got done and got done by a serious country, I mean, they have a pretty decent bond market. They have it and so forth. Okay, so let me just say thank you. Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your attention.